This conference will now be recorded.
Hello and welcome to a revisit of A Monkey House on Mondays, one of my earliest conversations with Martyn Allison. And Martyn got us an awful lot of time to think about stuff, but premised all his answers with, I think it's too early to say. So we're back to talk to Martyn to see if actually we've learned a little bit more and we can add more to the conversations that people will be having. But before we start that, I just need to check, Martyn, you seem to have a relatively nice tan, so is the garden looking good at the moment?
The garden's looking very good, yes. Nothing else is, but the garden is.
Fantastic. And here in Leicestershire, actually, we've had an awful lot of rain, haven't we? So the grass is growing really well at the moment. I'm quite pleased with mine.
Absolutely.
Okay, so one of the things we talked to you about was the Chief Medical Officer's announcement every day almost that we could all have a right to 1 hour of physical activity a day. And what we wanted to know from you was, do you think that would make a difference? So given the time that we've had, do you think it has made a difference to people's understanding of physical activity?
I think it's been very, very powerful inside the sector. It's created a great deal of hope and ambition. I'm not sure it's made the same impact outside the sector, and I think that's the challenge. One of the markers for me was 3 weeks ago, the Local Government Chronicle produced a insert on 30 ways local government would change as a result of coronavirus. Yeah. Not one mention of physical activity. What was mentioned quite boldly was the whole issue of cycling and walking.
Yeah.
But not from an activity or health perspective at all. It was all about health, it was all about transport and environment and everything else. So it hadn't landed in that context at all. I did express the view the other weekend to somebody that I just wondered whether it was actually the nudge unit that introduced it into the conversation. Because we know they were really nervous that the public wouldn't buy not going out at all.
Yeah.
So what can we introduce into this messaging that gives them a little bit, you can go out a bit? Okay. And it emerged out of that. So I've no proof, I've no evidence of that, but it has not been heard at all as part of coming out of lockdown.
Right.
We're not hearing now go out and do, it's not got the power coming out. So in the paper I wrote over the weekend, I've come to the conclusion that as a piece of messaging, it is nowhere near powerful enough to solve the problems we're now going to face around finance. And if we rely on it, I think we're being naive, is my conclusion.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think if we continue to think about our offer as being the four walls of a sports centre and a leisure centre, I think absolutely we will have missed an opportunity to maximise the impact of people now experiencing cycling, now experiencing running, and how we can assist people to continue to take their physical activity and some active transport, reduce the emissions that we all suffer from on the planet, but at the same time make sure we have some form of engagement, helping them give advice or whatever it happens to be.
I think it's deeper than that. I think where I was coming from over the weekend, if the scale of the financial problem in local government is at the scale that I think it is, and if the challenge is how do we convince elected members to invest in us and not other things, then my point is that just telling elected members that physical activity is good for us because the Prime Minister said so is not going to land. It's not powerful enough as a piece of messaging in that context.
That context, yeah. Which is why it becomes more important when we start listening to people like Andy King, who's talking about prehabilitation. It's about the services that we can offer to reduce the impact of COVID-20 and 21 by getting our communities
very powerful,
or weight management and things like that. Okay. So we also asked you about the representative bodies, the organisations that are out there that we look to for support, for guidance, for strategy. And again, you said it's probably too early to tell. So has anything changed in your view around Sport England and UK Active and Community Leisure UK and Simsper, etc.?
It's slowly emerging. It's not emerging fast enough for me, because I think we've lost the opportunity to actually shape the start of the recovery process. We did a leadership essentials session last week. I won't go into the details of what it was about, but there was one very powerful moment when the group I was working with said, we've just realised we should have done this 10 weeks ago.
Okay. Yeah.
So there is still that sense that to some degree we've missed the boat. Because we're now so busy talking about reopening, where is the headroom going to come to deal with the other stuff? And that's a real fear I've got. So individually, Sport England, the paper that they put out the other week about shaping the future, I thought that was excellent. I thought it was very brave. I thought to say this isn't the strategy all wrapped up together. This is our thought processes. What do you think? You know, I thought they embraced a lot of the things that I would share. I thought it's a real shame that they talked about proportionate universalism without using the term because they think it's too complicated. I think the biggest thing that was missing was any reference to leadership, and we'll perhaps talk about that. So Sport England moving in the right direction, starting to shape, and the stuff they've done over the last few days around racism has been of a really high standard and a high quality. So good for them. UK Active, I think, have done a great job in terms of getting the message over and trying to campaign for income to support the sector. I just didn't think it was going to work. I never thought there was going to be a pot of gold ring fenced to save leisure contracts. I would have been really surprised if that had been successful. But, you know, at least they tried, and it was comprehensive.
Absolutely.
And it brought the sector again together around something. So good on them, you know, well done. I think Clower have started to come into the scene. Two papers, a very simple thought piece first, and then the paper last week that is really, I think, where we need to be, and we'll perhaps talk about that. So I think Clower are starting to get their heads around the strategic positioning of the sector. So good on them. Simspa, I'm not sure about, Dave. I don't know where they're sitting in some of this. A lot of the stuff has been online driven by activity operators and things like that. I'm not hearing a lot about the big strategic thinking coming out of Simspa. I know there's something due out in the magazine next time because I contributed. So maybe that. I don't know where they are in terms of their strategic thinking around operational thinking. Again, very good on the operational, not yet seeing the big strategic messaging.
Okay, that's interesting. And you've alluded there to the fact that I think leadership will be a challenge for us going forward. So I suppose my question is really about what do we need to be thinking about now? What have we got to put in place now to make this something that actually, when we look back on in 10 years, that COVID created something fantastic. COVID did something for us that made us do things in different ways that really meant that we made a difference. What sort of things have we got to be looking at, do you think?
Let me answer that question by saying that I think the future now, I was uncertain before, but I think the future now, there's three possible directions of travel. One is the sector just gets obliterated. In the paper at the weekend, I called it meltdown. You know, that we just are not important enough to councils. There's no national funding, and all the problems around reopening centres without income is just going to decimate the sector. The second is that we survive, but things don't really change.
Okay.
So we just about open, we transfer all the debt in contracts into the future, but that means we just become worse at equalities and access. sports clubs go backwards to just looking after their members and no intervention work. We survive, but we don't progress in any sort of way.
Okay.
That might be good enough. Or we really do grasp the bullet that's there, and we start thinking fundamentally different around systems, around place, about working collaboratively, all the things I've written about in terms of systems work and system change. Andy King was moving, as you said, that direction. He was looking about, I mean, he talked about the different operators, even who doesn't matter who they were, working collaboratively. And I think if anyone can produce that sort of future, it's probably Greater Manchester. I've always had my money on them coming out the blocks differently. We'll see whether I'm right. I think what's interesting is I don't think they're an either or options. I think all those three scenarios will happen somewhere. And the sector won't come out of this in a consistent way because still a lack of national leadership. It'll be about local leadership that will decide.
Okay. Now that's interesting. So local leadership, is that the voice of the community? Is that the people who are in those positions of so-called leaders because that's what they've achieved? Where does that leadership come from?
It's a lot of it will start now with councils, particularly where contracts are involved and funding is involved. If councils see that there is a place for this sector in their future, and we see what our contribution can be, then it's that collaborative leadership that will shape that future.
Okay.
If councils don't see us as having any future, we can't afford it, we're in debt, let's just sell off our leisure centres, and we don't have the quality of leadership to explain why they shouldn't do that, you're in that meltdown scenario. So it's about the quality of local leadership to work collaboratively. So it's leaders of councils, it's corporate directors, it's chief executives, it's the director of public health, it's the contractors who are running the facilities, it's the county, sorry, not county, active partnerships. It's the consultants. How are they going in with a very narrow, I'll help you save your facility? Or are they going in and saying, let's work collaboratively to make the place better? So everybody, and that's why leadership, I argue now, is no longer hierarchical. It's not about leadership of the style of management. It's about building a system where everybody is a leader. The concept of distributive leadership. Does that make sense?
Really interesting. Okay, so you've mentioned you've done some writing over the weekend. Is that, have you published that, or are you about to publish it?
That's published. Yeah, it's published on my normal LinkedIn. It's had about 1,200, 1,300 views over the weekend.
Fantastic.
And in that, I refer to these 4 scenarios in the appendix. So I've written 4 scenarios. So yes, and I go through that and I talk about the equality stuff, which I think is incredibly powerful. So I think we are at this tipping moment. I think relying on physical activity is no longer enough. It's got to be bigger. In the paper, I think the 3 things that would shift relationships with councils are: 1, we're part of economic recovery. We're not a subsidy, we're actually part of your economic recovery. 2, we're part of health inequalities, not activity. And 3, we're part of the climate change initiative. If we build our case around those 3 strategic priorities, we might get listened to.
Brilliant. And that is a really good point to finish on, because yet again, we filled our time so quickly. So interesting. Martyn, thank you so much for your time. I really hope people grab hold of those 3 pieces that we've just talked about. It certainly is added to my thinking for today. So Martyn, thank you so much for your time. Really good to see you, and we'll catch up soon. Take care.
All right. Bye-bye.